Okay, awesome. Now that we're recording, welcome again to session 2 of Hackschool. We're doing over intro to JavaScript, like I said. Here are the link to the slides and the link to the README, so you can follow along if you want. The README will also be on the lower left corner of all of our slides, so in case you're joining or in case you forget or something like that. Each also link to each other, so if you get one, you're good. Here's also for those of you who are ACM members, the attendance code is JavaScript, and we also have our feedback form, which we're doing a raffle for, and we're doing one of those every week. And we'll be giving out those prizes by the end of the workshop series. So please fill out the feedback form. We really appreciate your feedback, and you could win some money. Okay, just some logistical things before we dive into the workshop itself. Our next session is going to be Wednesday, 6 p.m. again, and it's going to be on more in-depth dive into JavaScript and how we can use it to manipulate web pages. So look out for that on our Facebook and Instagram. And then once again, we want to reiterate, today's workshop is going to be very, very content intensive. So if you have any questions at any point, mentors will be in the chat ready to answer them. And we're also going to stop intermittently as we're presenting to ask if you have any questions. Like if you're confused, please speak up and don't be afraid to think that you're not getting it, because there's going to be a lot of information. All right, so just to go over the goal of this workshop, we're going to get into the basics of how to program in JavaScript. And this will build the foundation for what you need to start manipulating web pages and building functionality on your websites. We're also going to show you a little bit of a preview of next week's workshop, so you can understand why we're learning JavaScript. So first off, what is JavaScript? JavaScript is just a programming language. If you want to get technical, I guess it's a scripting language. And we call it the language of the web because everything you do, or all the functionality on any website you're on, is coded in JavaScript. Like when you go to links, when you open pages using buttons, or when you are, if you have like a fun little app where you're keeping track of your expenses and you're adding stuff like that. All that logic is run by JavaScript. So that's why we're learning JavaScript. Yeah, so like I was saying, like something that we learned in the last session was HTML, CSS, just the content and the styles. But so you would be able to create a button and you'd be able to create this text that says click this button. But without JavaScript, you wouldn't be able to change that text to button clicked after you click this button. So JavaScript is all about the interactions and all about the logic of your web page.
Okay, so thank you for that. The amazing introduction. Now, just like as a motivation for why we're learning JavaScript, I'm going to show you like a little sneak peek at what we'll be doing next week, sort of. So let me open a new tab, and you definitely don't have to follow along. You probably won't understand any of this if you're here, which is fine because you're not supposed to. So let me just do some stuff and we'll see what happens. And hopefully by next week, you'll be able to understand what we're doing here. So I'm just going to copy some code and paste it in here. And don't worry about any of what this does because, you know. So I'm just going to press enter. And basically what I just did is like changed, or I added an on-click listener. You'll learn more about that later, to some element of this page. So now if I click code the future, you'll see that it changes to say beep beep. So yeah, cool stuff. And that's the kind of like interactivity that you can get with JavaScript. And I'm just showing this as, again, some motivation for why we're learning this in the first place. So yeah, now let me continue with the presentation. Okay, so before we really get started, I just want to mention that like you're welcome to code along in your browser. with the lesson, but we would actually prefer you not to, just because it can be hard to try and like copy some code and like type it exactly the way you see it, and also like hear what we're talking about and understand those concepts. So what we'd actually prefer you guys to do is like take notes on things that are new to you, and just know that we'll always have like the source code available for you later. And I can actually just pull that up for you really quick to show you where it is. So if you go to the README, which is taking forever to load for some reason. So if you go to the README, you can go to this example folder, and inside this example.js thing is pretty much everything we'll be covering today. So the code is all there for you for later. So don't like feel like you're not going to get it down and then it's going to disappear forever. So yeah, please try and like take notes on new concepts and not code along. And like Miles said earlier, we're doing like a lot of content today. So it's totally fine if you like understand like 5% of it. Like the concepts that we're covering usually take like several lectures in CS31 to introduce, and we're teaching it in like a single 2-hour workshop. So yeah, like don't feel alone if you aren't getting anything or if you're like really confused, because that's totally normal. We're just here to like convey the information and just like so it's out there, but you can take your time. That's totally natural. Okay, so yeah, let's start learning JavaScript. So to run JavaScript, we're going to be using the console. So you just saw me use it just now. And let me just explain some parts about the console. So the first kind of important thing is it'll show the result or value before you press enter. Now, what do I mean by that? Let me just open up the console and show you. So to open it, we use our dev tools. So we learned last time we right click and then click inspect to open dev tools. Let me make it a bit bigger. Okay, and then at the top, you're going to select console. And then this is the console where we're going to run everything. So I said that like it shows you the result before you press enter. What does that mean? If I say like 5 + 5, it says 10 before I actually entered this code. So that's what that means. Another thing is it remembers previous lines of code you've run. And that kind of sounds weird, but what I mean by that, I guess maybe we'll see later. That sounds vague, but we'll clear it up later. And finally, you can use the up key to find previous lines of code. So you saw that I just ran 5 + 5. Now, if I go to my keyboard and press up, it'll actually like retrieve that last line of code. And I can even press up again and like it'll enter that previous really long thing I typed out. And you can also like press down to go back forward. So those are just like some tricks for navigating the console. And oops, back to presenting. Okay, so we also have an important thing that we're going to be using a lot is console.log. You don't really need to know exactly what this means or why it looks like this, but we're just going to use it to print stuff to the console. So if I console.log hello, it'll just say hello back to me. And we'll see kind of why this is useful later on. All right, so now let's like actually learn some JavaScript. The first kind of important thing that you should know is how to write a comment. We learned last week in the HTML and CSS workshop that a comment is just some line of code, or well, not really code. It's kind of like a line that doesn't affect the code. So this is kind of useful for annotating your own code. Maybe if you write something really complicated and you feel like you're going to forget what it means later, you can write a little comment to kind of explain part of it. And you can write a single line comment using these 2 slashes. And you can also write multi-line comments with like the /* enclosing. So yeah. Okay, so let's learn about basic types and values in JavaScript. So there are several of them that we can use, and the ones we're going to be learning today are numbers, booleans, and strings. So we'll just tackle these concepts one by one. First, we have numbers. Numbers, we can have all types of numbers pretty much. So we have like some integer values, 9999, 42. We have some decimals, like some digits of pi here. We have negative numbers, and we also have like the scientific notation. We can actually write a number like this in JavaScript. And what can we do with numbers? Well, we can do our normal arithmetic operators. So adding, subtraction, multiplication, division, as well as a couple other ones that aren't like kind of core, I guess. And we also have these comparison operators. So these look kind of weird. Let's just go through them one by one. So first we have this 3 equals signs, and this just checks for equality. So if you have 2 numbers on each side, we'll check if they're equal. And then we have a not equals, which is just exclamation point, and then 2 equal signs. And then we have sort of like the normal looking math like ones. So we have less than, greater than, less than equal to, and greater than or equal to. So let's just try some of these out in our console. So we already looked at 5 plus 5. And you also might notice I'm putting a semicolon at the end of each line. That's just kind of like a JavaScript thing. It's not technically required, but we'll be using it all the time for consistency. So let's see a few others. So we can look at some subtraction. Let's look at some multiplication and division. These are all like pretty straightforward. But the comparison operators might seem a little more confusing. So let's just see what happens if we try and compare 3 with 5. You can see that the console output false. So this is what we call a Boolean value. It's kind of just like a fact, it's true or it's false. So all of these comparison operators will return a Boolean value if it's true or if it's false. So let's compare a couple others. So 4 is not equal to 4, should also be false because we know that 4 is equal to 4. We can try 5 is less than 10, which we get is true. We can try 5 is greater than 10, which is false. So hopefully this makes sense. Okay, looks like there aren't any questions. So then let's continue to our next type, which is Booleans. So like I said, they have 2 values, true or false. So not this like weird hybrid of true and false together. It's always going to be either true or false. And here are some operators we can use with Booleans. And we have 3 kind of primary ones. First, we have and, which is these 2 ampersands. We have not, which is an exclamation point, and we have or, which is these 2 like straight lines. So out of these 3, and or like require 2 sides. So like one side and the other side. And same with or, it'd be like one side or the other side. Whereas not is it only applies to like one thing. So it's like not true or not false. Okay, yeah. So when I was first learning this stuff, I did not know what this like weird pipe looking thing was. So in case you are also unsure, it's like this key. If you press shift at the same time, then you get this like straight line. Okay, so now let's look at some examples of Booleans. We already said that and takes 2 sides. So we can say like, what if we have true and true? And we get that it's true because it's true and well, it kind of just makes sense. It sounds weird if I say it out loud, I guess. How about true and false? We get false because they're not both true. And somewhat predictably, I guess, false and false is also false. So how about or? Let's try true or true. We see that true or true is true. How about true or false? You get true. So for or, you can see that only one side needs to be true, but for and, both sides need to be true. And finally, let's try false or false, which should be false. Okay. So now let's just look at the not operator. So if you say not false, you kind of expect that it'd be the opposite, which is true. And same with the other way around. So we get false. And I'm also going to just show how we can kind of like, we learned earlier that we can use these comparison operators to get a Boolean value. And we, since this is a Boolean value, we can use these like ands, ors, and nots on them. So I can try like not 5 is equal to 10 or 20, which we get true because if you think about it, 5 equals 20 would be false, and then not false is true. So you can see how we can like combine these operators to get different values. Okay. So our final basic type that we'll talk about is strings. And a string is just a sequence of characters surrounded by quotes, which sounds simple enough. So we have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, even though we think of this as a number because it's inside these quotes, it's actually a string. We have hello, we have Smallberg, and I love cooking. So you can see we have like all sorts of types of characters. We have numbers, we have alphabetical characters, punctuation, lots of Smallberg fans, I guess. Okay, so let's see what we can do with strings. Strings can be concatenated, which is kind of just like a fancy word for joined, using the plus operator. So I can add sort of this hello string and this world string. You can also compare strings to each other. So kind of similar to numbers, if strings are the same, it'll like, you can check if they're equal or not. And let's just look at some examples of that. Okay. So we can just try out some of these that we have on the slides. So I make my first string, hello, and then I'm going to add it to world. And you can see that it adds them together and I get this hello world string. Let's try the others. So we have hello is not equal to world. And because these aren't the same string, I expect it to be true. And finally, for something a bit more interesting than this, let's try high in uppercase and see if it's equal to high in lowercase. Okay, and we see that it was false. Why is that? Just because when it's checking for equality, it'll also check to make sure that the case is equal, because this isn't really the same thing as this. Okay. So we kind of covered a bunch of things pretty quickly, and just to check how well you guys are understanding, we're going to do a little poll. Okay, I just realized I forgot the experience level poll. Do you want to do that later, Miles?
Yeah, I guess we can do after this poll.
Okay, so I'm going to launch the poll. And as instructions say, for each question, select the answer that you think will get printed out. And we'll discuss in a couple minutes or once there's like enough answers. There's a question in the chat, how do you put quotes around a string? You just like actually just type a quote on like the keyboard, it's like the key next to enter, and then put whatever your string is inside of that. Yeah, and as Eugene said, strings can be either enclosed in single quotes or double quotes, but the opening quote and the closing quote have to be the same. You like can't just mix and match them. Okay, it looks like most people have answered. So if you haven't gotten the chance to do that yet, I'm sorry, but the questions are on the README, so you can practice them later. So now let's go over the answers. Okay, so for the first question, we have console.log 1 plus 11. And since 1 and 11 are both numbers, we're just adding them together and we're going to print 12. For the second one, we have two strings that we're adding together. So they're going to be concatenated to 111. This is kind of like, I guess, a little bit tricky maybe. The next question, we have hello is not equal to hello, except one is capitals and the other one is not. And this is going to be true because we discussed earlier that capitals are treated differently from lowercase, so the strings are not equal. For number 4, we have console.log 5 is equal to 8. And we know that 5 is not equal to 8, so the answer should be false. So it's something else that's not in the list. And for number 5, console.log not true. Not true is false, so it'll print false. And for number 6, we have console.log 4 is less than 6 and 8 is not equal to 10. So we can just break it down and say 4 is less than 6. Well, that's true. 8 is not equal to 10. That's also true. So true and true is true. So yeah, good job, everybody. I will stop this. And next we'll talk about, so we learned about like how to use values, but what if we want to store them to use later on? Or like, what if we have some really important value? This is pretty much where variables come in. So this is kind of, there are two ways that we can use to declare a variable. One is let and the other is const. So let's talk about let first. You can see I have this little example at the bottom that says let x equals 5. Now what is this really doing? Let's just look at our console and try some stuff out. So I can say let x, and you can see that that's fine. And what this does is make a variable named x. And I can also set x equal to 5. And then the value of x is just 5, which we can console.log the name of the variable to see that it's 5. So when I said let x equals 5, what I'm really saying is make a variable called x and set the value equal to 5. Now, what can we do with a variable? Well, we saw that we could assign it. Let's try and assign a different value. So I'm going to say x equals 10, and that worked fine. So we can reassign values to the variable. And we also saw we could console.log a variable. So we can just like use the name of the variable elsewhere in our program pretty much. And it'll just use the value of the variable there. Okay, so on the other hand, we also have this constant thing. So we see that const is used for constants. So if you have a variable in your program that you don't want to be able to change, then you declare it with const. So I can say const pi equals 3.14. Oh, that's 3.14. And I can just set my pi variable equal to 3.14. Now, what if I decide like I want some more precision because I don't know, engineering or something. So I want to like set this variable to something else. 3.14159265. So I'm going to say pi is equal to this and press enter. And you're going to see that it's going to like yell at me. It'll say uncaught type error, assignment to constant variable. So it doesn't like that. And if we actually print out the value of pi, we can see that it's still 3.14. So we weren't able to successfully change it. So this is it's always a good idea to make your variables constant if you know you don't want to change the value later, just as like a good practice. Okay. And we can just see a couple more examples of how to use variables. So let's say I have like a circle with radius 3 or something, then I can calculate the area of the circle with like pi r squared. So we can do pi times 3 times 3. I can say like let a equals this value, and then console.log the value of a, and that's going to be the area of our circle. So let's see if there are any questions in the chat. Are there any that haven't been answered yet?
So what if you want to clear the constant after assigning it? Like, is there any way to clear the constant after assigning it?
So if you do it in like this console, I think probably not unless you reopen a new console. But typically when we're writing our JavaScript code, it'll be like in a file that you'll like run or execute later. And like you can always change the lines of the file that you decide to execute. So hopefully that clears things up.
And then could you also explain the undefined that shows up in the console?
Like this?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like what I said before is how when you like write something in the console, it'll like sort of like show what the value is. Like it'll tell you what the value of the expression you just wrote was. So here my expression is 5 plus 10, and it'll say that it was 15. But when you're doing an assignment, you're not actually like the assignment expression itself doesn't really have a value. We're creating a variable with a value, but this assignment doesn't have a value. So that's why it's like undefined. If that doesn't make complete sense, just kind of like know that it doesn't matter too much. But yeah, if someone else has a better explanation, feel free to offer it. Is there anything else?
I think that is it.
Okay. Oh, someone just asked, undefined is like a void return type in other languages. Yeah, I think sort of, maybe. Okay, no. I think you can like think of it. yeah, let's just move on for now because we have a lot of stuff to get through and it's not super important. Okay, so we're gonna do another poll. This one will be about variables. Try your best to answer the questions. And again, we'll go over the stuff in a bit. Okay, it looks like most people have answered again, so I'm gonna end the poll and we can go over the questions. So first one, pretty straightforward. We have width equals 10, height equals 2, and we're console logging the product of it, so we get 20. For number 2, we have I love boba equals true, and boba is good equals true, and then we're console.logging the I love boba and boba is good, which is going to be true because they're both true. Then we have let today equals Wednesday and console.log today is plus today. And we're going to get today is Wednesday. Yeah. And there's going to be a space because we ended our first string like today is with a space. So when we add them together, that space is kept. And finally, for number 4, we have UCLA score is 100, USC score equals 0, and we're console.logging that UCLA score is greater than USC, which is of course true. And yeah, great job. So let me, oh, I forgot to share the results. Well, there they are. Okay, so for the next topic we're going to learn about is we're going to talk about functions. So here's some motivation. Like, let's say that I like really love boba and I want to like tell the whole world how much I love boba and all the different kinds of boba I like. So maybe I'll write this little piece of code. So I'm just going to console.log a whole bunch of I really like blah, blah, blah with boba. And these are all like the teas that I like. So you can see that like there's a whole bunch of repetition here. And let's see, like, what if I decided to like change my mind and say that instead of I really like, I want to say I really love Thai tea with boba. I really love roasted oolong tea with boba, blah, blah, blah. So let's, oops. Let me actually just, for the sake of the example, do that so we can see how annoying it would be. So I can say I really love, and even like copying and pasting, this is still kind of tiresome. When I press enter, it like prints them all out, which is great, but I don't really want to have to like change each line of code, right? So that's kind of the motivation behind functions. So functions will let us try and like sort of avoid this problem. So like I said, what if I want to change my mind about what message I want to send? It's a lot of work to change each console.log. Like maybe I had 100 different bobas and I'd have to change each of the 100 lines. Like that'd be like a pain. So what is a function? A function is basically used to perform an action. So they can have arguments or inputs and they can return a value, which is kind of just like an output. And the neat thing about functions in JavaScript is we can assign functions to variables, and we'll see kind of what that means in a second. So what does a function look like when I write it down? There are 2 main ways to declare functions in JavaScript. So we have this first way and we have a second way. And for this workshop, we're only going to use the first way. So let's talk about that a bit closer. All right, so let's look at each part of the function. On the left side, we say const my function. And this looks a lot like the variable declaration we learned earlier. So we are declaring a constant named my function. And then we have this equals to assign it. And this right-hand side is like sort of what the function is. So the first little piece of the function is arg1 and arg2. And this is just the arguments that the function accepts, because we said that a function can have inputs, and these are those inputs. And you'll see we just put them in parentheses and separate them by commas. Okay, so then we also have this arrow. And I usually think of this arrow as like it goes to, or it's like, here's the inputs, and then you take those inputs and put them in. I don't know if that makes sense, but then we have like these braces, and inside is whatever the function does. So this function just has like a comment. It doesn't really do anything. Also, don't forget there's a little semicolon at the end because this is an assignment. Okay, so now we're going to do some examples, and I'll leave this up so that we can see the syntax. All right, yeah, so we're going to write some functions. So let's try and write a function called hello world, and all it's going to do is console.log hello world. So I'm going to say const, and then I'm going to name my function something. So I'll name it hello world. Then next we have this equals. So I'm going to put equals. And next we have arguments. Now I don't really need arguments for this function because we're not actually going to do anything but print hello world. So I'm going to put empty parentheses to show that there's no arguments. And then I have the arrow as usual, and then the opening brace. So inside of this function, all I'm going to do is console.log hello world. And then I'm going to make sure to put the closing brace and a semicolon. And here is our function declaration. And you can see that it looks a lot like this basic syntax that we learned. So now let's press enter. So our function is defined and we can call it now. So the way we call a function is we say the name of the function. In this case, it's hello world. And then we put parentheses, and inside these parentheses would go any arguments you're passing in. Since this function has no arguments, these are just empty. So I can just call this function, and you can see that it prints hello world. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a second to see if there's questions. Okay, lots of boba discussion. Okay, I think, oh, white space, does white space matter in JavaScript? Like Galen said, white space does not matter. So you technically don't need these indentations or like the way I've indented stuff, but it's always good practice to make your code clean and readable. Okay, so if there's no other questions for the moment, then, oh, is there anything special about marking the function constant? It basically just means that your function, like my hello world, I can never like change what it does or like redefine it. Yeah, so like any other variable, it's just whether you can reassign to it or not. Okay, so then I'll move on and let's write another function. So we wrote a hello world that doesn't take any arguments. Let's try writing a function that'll take in someone's name and say hello to that person. So I'm going to call this hello name. And we said already that it would take a name input. And what do we want to do? Well, we want to console.log hello and the name. So we learned earlier how we can add the strings together. So I'm going to say hello and then just add it to the input variable. Okay. So I'm going to press enter. And now let's try calling hello name. So we know that this function requires an argument, which means that something should really go inside these braces. Since my name is Jamie, I'm going to put my own name. And you can see that it says, hello, Jamie. So great. Now we like know how to use like our variables inside of functions. Awesome. Let's see if there are any questions. What does the arrow do? Like Galen said, it's just part of the syntax. So it just shows that we're defining a function. Could you write the function as const hello name name instead? So like we discussed earlier in the slides, there's two ways to declare it. So the way you're declaring it looks more like the second one. In that case, you have to say function, like you can't say const function. So you'd say like function hello name, but we recommend using this arrow one instead. Okay. What would happen if you input an integer instead? Okay, why don't we just try it and see what happens? So I can say hello name and put like 1. and we'll see it says hello 1. So some people were discussing this earlier, I think, but pretty much what happens here is JavaScript says, okay, you're trying to add a string to a name or a string to a number. What I'm going to do is make this number into a string and then add them together. So it'll kind of just like convert this number to a string. And finally, someone said, for the example you just did, you didn't specify the name's variable type. How come? So that's just a thing in JavaScript. You don't say the type of the variable. Okay. With that, I'll move on to our next example. So our next example is going to be a function that triples whatever number you input. So I'm going to name this triple, and we're going to have a number. I'll just call it x. And what are we going to do? Well, I said we we're going to triple x, right? So I'm going to say x times 3. And then there's my function definition. So now let's try computing like what 3 times or the triple of x is. So I can, or not x, triple of 5. So if I say triple of 5, oh no, like you can see we got this undefined value. So what happened here? Basically, we never actually returned a value. Like we didn't say that this function output something. So we didn't get any output back. Let's try and fix that. So what I'm going to do is make a new function called triple return, which will also take x again. And this time, instead of just saying x times 3, I'm going to return x times 3. And let's try that again. So let's try a triple return with 5. You can see that this time we got 15, which is exactly what we want. However, like you might notice like we're not actually saving this anywhere. So maybe if like we wanted to store this value for later and use it again, maybe we want like a variable. So we can say like actually I would make this const because 3 times 5 would never change. So I'll say triple 5 is equal to triple return 5. And now if I say triple 5 or console.log triple 5, we get 15. So the value of our variable is 15, and we initialized it by calling this function with 5. Okay, so moral of the story with this function is if you're gonna like if you want your function to give you a value that you'll use later or store later, you should always make sure that you have some sort of return statement that's returning the value to you. Otherwise, you're not actually getting like an output from the function. Okay, so I'm gonna pause for questions now. Okay, if you say hello name 3 plus 5, do you get hello 8 or hello 3 plus 5? So the way you typed it, just like hello name 3 plus 5, JavaScript will add these together to make 8 and then pass 8 in. But if you wanted it to say 3 plus 5, you could always put these in quotes, and then this would be a string, and you could just add it directly and then say hello 3 plus 5. Okay. I think there's not other questions for now. So let's do another example. Remember earlier, like we had this dilemma where we wanted to talk about how much we love boba. And we didn't want to have to like change every single line if we changed our message. So how about we write a function that will like print out this message given some type of t, and then we can sort of solve our problem from earlier. So I will call this function love boba. And what I'm going to pass in is like the name of some sort of t. And then what will happen? What do I want it to do? Well, I want it to console.log how much I love boba. So I'll say I really like, and then put the t, and then with boba. So you can see that we can add multiple strings together at the same time. And then I'm just going to enter this. And now I can say something like love boba, hi tea, love boba, roasted oolong tea, love boba, milk tea, and so on and so forth. And you can see that now when I call this function, it prints these things all out for me. So then what if I wanted to like change it to say I really, really love? then what I could do, so since we're in the console, I can't just directly change the code and then have it re-execute. I have to like make a new function. But what you would normally want to do is just change this really like part. But for the sake of like using the console, I'll define a new function that says I really, really love. And then, yeah, it doesn't really make sense to show this example just in the console because I had to change these function names. So I had to change every line anyways. But you can imagine that if I had been able to just change this original function, I wouldn't have to change any of these. So I'd only have to change a single line. But you can see sort of how that would work. All right. Okay, so for a final example, before we do some practice, I want to write a function called boba budget that takes in two inputs. So one input is my budget, which is how much money I can spend on boba. And the other one is the number of bobas I've already bought. So what I want to print out in the end is how many more bobas I can buy for like the month or something. So I'm going to declare the function. It's going to be called boba budget. And I'm going to get my budget and the number of bobas I already bought. So the reason that I'm showing this function is because all of the functions we've written already pretty much only have one line. And I just want to show how you can have like as many lines of code as you want inside of the function. So I'm going to make some intermediate variables to just make the math more like easy to follow. And I also forgot to mention that we're going to assume that boba is always $4, which is unrealistic, but we can all dream. So we're going to calculate the amount of money I've already spent, which is just going to be the budget times 4. So that's how many dollars I've spent on boba. Next, we're going to calculate how much, or this is not right. This should be no, the number of bobas I bought times 4. And then we want to calculate how much money I have left. So let's calculate the number of remaining money, which is budget minus spent. So you can see I'm using the input variables and I'm also using some intermediate ones that I created. And finally, the amount of bobas I can buy now is however much money I have remaining divided by 4. So the amount I can buy is going to be equal to remaining divided by 4. And finally, I'm going to want to print out how many bobas I can buy. So I'm saying you can buy, then the number I can buy, and I'll say more bobas this month. Okay, and like we talked about earlier, since this is a number and these are strings, JavaScript will make this into a string first and then add all the strings together. So let's go ahead and try to run our function. So let's say that my budget for boba is $20 for this month and I have bought a single boba. I can go ahead and print this or execute it. They'll say you can buy 4 more bobas this month, which is great news. Now I can also say, let's say that like my budget is still $20, but I've already gotten 10 bobas. I can buy -5 more bobas this month. So clearly I have a budgeting issue that I need to resolve a little bit. But yeah. Okay, so those are all the examples of functions we're going to do. If you have any questions about functions, feel free to ask them now. And I'm going to go ahead and start the poll for the functions. Let me just. Okay, and for this one, there can be multiple answers for some of them. So for those questions, you're going to want to select every line that could possibly get printed out. Also, since this might take a little while, I'm gonna play some lo-fi still for you guys to listen to while you do this poll. So this question in the poll, are we selecting the output for every function in each question? Yes, you should like select every line that would get printed from the call of the first function. Also, I'll be closing the poll to discuss in a bit. So if you're not sure, or if like you have no idea, you can just like submit it empty if you want. Just because like we want answers to the last question about how comfortable you're feeling. So if you're not sure about all the other questions, feel free to just answer the last one. But yeah, we'll be going over them in like 20 seconds. Someone said the poll had the same arguments for different functions. Is that allowed? Yes, it's allowed. So I think we have an example earlier. Like we have this triple function that takes in an argument x and a triple return, which also takes x. Because you're only using x inside of this function, yeah, you can have the same name of an argument for different functions. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close the poll and we can go over the question answers. All right, so let me share the results. Okay, so first up, we have foo and mystery, and we're console.logging mystery 10. So let's see, we call mystery with 10, then we'll return foo of 20 plus foo of 10, and foo of 20 is 22, foo of 10 is 12, so we get 34 at the end. Next we're calling Baz with Jamie. What does Baz do? So we're gonna console.log peep of s, where s is the argument. So we're calling peep of Jamie. So what are we going to do? We're going to console.log s plus peep. So that would give us Jamie peep, and then we're returning peep. But since we returned it, we're going to console.log it from Baz. So the two answers here are Jamie peep and peep. And I noticed a lot of people said Jamie peep peep. I think this might be due to confusion of the way console.log works. So at the end of each console.log, it'll like make a new line. So every console.log is on a new line, on a different line. So that's why I wouldn't be Jamie Peep Peep, but that's pretty close. All right, for number 3, we have, I'm regretting these functions names now. Okay, so we called yop with 5, 2, and 3. So with y, we're calling yep, and that's 5. So we're calling yep of 5, and we're getting 7. Then we're adding it to o of o. In this case, the argument o is 2. So we're calling o with 2 and getting 6. And then finally, we're doing pop with p, and p is 3. So pop of 3 is going to be 3 minus 7, which is -4. And if you add them all together, the answer is 9. Yeah. Okay. And moving on. So finally, we have these functions. We are calling no with jam and bread. And this one was supposed to be tricky because of like the argument order. So you can see we're passing an n and then o, but we're calling na with o and nope with n. So we're calling na with bread. And what does na do? It console.logs s plus s. So we're going to get bread. And then we're calling nope with n, and n is jam in this case. So when we call nope with n, we're getting n plus a bunch of exclamation points. So we get jam. So the two answers are bread, and jam with exclamation points. Okay. So that's that for the poll. So now it's going to be time for the break. Miles, how long do you want it to be for?
Yeah, let's do until 7:05.
Okay, so we'll come back at 7:05. And in the meantime, if you guys could fill out the experience level poll, we would really appreciate it. So I'm just going to launch that. Yeah, so we'll come back at 7:05.
And I will pause the recording. All right, so now that we're back, let's talk about another feature tool in JavaScript called objects. So far, what we've been working with is variables, right? Where you can store a single piece of information, either string, number, whatever you want. And so let's take this example to start our introduction to objects. Say I wanted to store like my friend's information. If I did with variables, I would make a bunch of different variables for each of his different traits, his or her. So like name, Joe Bruin, age 18, maybe some other information like his grad year or something like that. And so we think about what happens if I want to store another set of this related data. You know, perhaps I have more than one friend and I want to store more data related to both of them. So this is when it starts to get a little bit messy. If you can imagine that each one has like at least 10 traits about them that I want to store. We have a lot of different like sort of related looking code. And we have like multiple name ones worth a pointer. we'll have multiple names, we'll have multiple ages, and it looks kind of messy. And if I have even more friends, then it'll be even messier. So how do we solve this? We use objects in JavaScript. So objects let you store data in a grouped way using key value pairs. So we'll talk about what this means a little bit more in depth. So the keys I've mentioned here are also called properties, and they are basically labels for your data, right? Just like a variable can act as a label for your information, we have properties within an object that also act as a label for your information. So the information, we call them values, and every property should have a corresponding value. And then altogether, this makes the whole object. So the object just groups together all this related data in a very concise way where we don't have to end up making name 1, name 2, name 3. Instead, we can just put them in a whole object. So let's talk about how we can access these object properties. And by access, I just mean like getting, well, actually before that, sorry. Does anybody have questions about just what an object is or the syntax? I cannot see chat.
There are not any questions.
Okay. Back to accessing properties. Basically just getting the value from the object, right? Because we have a bunch of different properties and they all have different values. What if I wanted to get the name of my friend? So what you can do, there's two ways to do it. This is the first way, it's called dot notation because you use a dot. So you just do the name of your object dot the name of your property. And so that will get the name inside the object that you're referencing. And you can do the same thing with something called bracket notation. And this is a bit different. You use the square brackets, and then you put the name of your property in quotes. So it's basically like a string. And this can be helpful if you have a variable that's holding a string and you want to use that to access a property instead of like the dot notation. Okay, and just like accessing, you can also modify object properties using the same two notations just by reassigning the specific property you want to change. So if I wanted to change the name, I can use dot notation to just set it equal to a different name. And if I wanted to set the age, I could use either dot or bracket notation to set it to a different age. Okay, before I move on to the next thing, are any questions about any of that basic object syntax or accessing or modifying?
Yeah, when you say person age equals 19 here, does that modify the variable for every single object or just like an instance of the object?
Okay, so let's go back to when I declare const person equals this object. Const person is just a variable. So we just have one variable called person and it holds this object. So there's no like instance, we're not talking about instances right now or anything like that. This is just another form of data for us.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, so when we modify the age in this specific variable, we're just modifying the age property in this specific object.
There's a question in chat saying, can you change the values in person if person is const?
Yeah, so I was gonna show this in the console later, but you can change the values even if the object itself is assigned to a constant variable. You can change the properties, however, you cannot change the object itself. So if I wanted to reassign person, it would not work because you can't change the object that, or you can't change the variable person, but you can change the properties inside of the object. Any other questions? Okay, let's take those in now. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is object methods. So in addition to properties, you can also put like properties and values. You can also put functions and objects. And it looks pretty similar where you have another label. But instead of, a string or a number or anything like that, we put our function syntax here. So we just have the parentheses to an arrow and then the brackets. And then inside here is whatever you want your function to do. So just like any other function, or we can also call object methods. We can do it using this notation here, where we just do the name of our object dot, and then the name of our method with the parentheses, because you always need parentheses if you're calling a function. And if you had arguments for this function, you would also put them in there. So let's do a quick example just to get you to see what this looks like. And I'll go over to the console here. Is this big enough for people? I can make it bigger.
I think that's good.
Okay. So let's go ahead. I'll just do a basic. You can have an empty object here. And I can like console log this object if I wanted to. And it's just empty, so expanding this will not do anything. So let's do something more interesting. Let's make an actual object that has stuff in it. I'm gonna go ahead and make our boba order because I'm actually kind of creating boba. But inside our boba order, let's see what are the types of properties we need. We'll probably need the type of the order. So I really love roasted oolong tea, milk tea. It's probably the best, and you can't change my mind. What else is there in a boba order? Size, we can do like large or something. We can also do the ice level. I always get light. We can do sweetness. I always get 50% because pretending I'm healthy. And include boba. I do want boba because what is boba without boba? All right, so I've just made an object. If you want to view that object, you can just type it out in the console. It even shows you this little preview here. But let's do some of that stuff with the access and modify. So if I actually wanted to change my boba order slightly, I could go ahead and say boba order include boba equals false. So I don't actually want boba, but then I'll realize how much of a heathen I am and change it back to true. You can also do this dot notation. So I'm going to do boba order dot type, or I'll just do ice level. We'll just change that to none for now. And if we want to see all these changes happening, you can always log your object. So boba order. And then you can expand this and you can see here's our properties, ice level, include boba size, sweetness, type, all that good stuff. Okay. Now let's do something a little bit more exciting with this boba order. I'm gonna make a function here called I'm going to make another object here called boba shop. And this one, let's say the name, it's boba time. Location in Westwood, California. And then this one, I'm gonna give a method. So let's say take order. And this is a function. So, and it's going to take a boba order. And what I'm gonna do with this boba order, I'm just gonna do something basic. Going to say place an order for boba order dot type. I can't see what I'm typing because of the zoom. Okay, or place an order for boba order dot type with boba order dot ice level ice and boba order dot what's it? What is the sorry, let me scroll up. I don't remember. Oh yeah, sweetness. Plus yeah. And let me just add place a large order, so order dot size. Okay. So that's our function, or that's our method. And then I'm going to go ahead and define that object. And now we can do boba order, or not, boba shop. So to call our object method, we can do boba shop dot take order boba order. And then it'll print out the whole order, place a large order for roasted along with tea with non-ice, sure is it like no ice, but and 50 sweetness. There's no space here because I forgot to add space, but hopefully that kind of shows you how we can use objects and object methods together. Any questions right now after the example? Let me see if I can see chat.
Can you go back and show the code for boba shop?
Yeah, boba shop. So this is boba shop. It has a name. It's an object. It has a name, a location, and it also has this method called take order. And it takes an argument of a boba order, and then it's going to print out this message that uses all the properties in our boba order object.
So then essentially, like for the take order, the method inside the object would just be like a function?
Yeah, so you can, it's basically a function. We call it an object method because it's attached to the object, but it is essentially just a function. You can use it like a function.
Okay, and then the syntax would just be like the difference between the method and this and a function would just be the column?
Yeah, so if you're creating a function outside of an object, you have to do like const the name of your variable because you have to assign the function to a specific variable. Since we're just going to like associate this function with a specific name in our object, like a label, we don't need to do const something equals because it's like we're just starting at the parentheses part of the function, and it's going to assign to this take order.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so if no more questions, let's run a poll. And so for this poll, it's not in the poll because otherwise you have to like scroll back and forth, but this is the object you should be referencing for the questions in that poll. So we'll just give a couple of minutes for you guys to answer that. Okay, so I'm gonna close the polling soon. So if you haven't answered yet, try to finalize your answer, or you can skip them, I guess, and just answer the last one. Okay, so I'm gonna share the results of the poll here. Okay, so this first example, we're just logging the name property and the UID property of the student object here. So the name property is Joe Bruin, and then the UID property is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we would get, first we would print out Joe Bruin, and then we would print out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 into the console. So the second question, so this one tests if the student dot is true Bruin property is true or not, and then prints out a specific message based on that. So in this object, the is true Bruin is true right now. So it would print out, let's do an 8 clap for, and then student dot name, which is Joe Bruin. And then the third question here, we defined a function called go eat lunch that takes one argument, which is the dining hall. And then we print out I love to eat at whatever dining hall is passed in. So when we call the go eat lunch function with the student.fave dining hall, we will get I love to eat at ePlate. Okay. Any questions about objects before we keep moving on? Because I noticed a lot of people said that they weren't totally clear on objects, which is totally fine because it's a new concept. But any questions before I keep going? I will take silence as a no. Okay. So I realized I skipped a section of our presentation, so I'm just going to go back right now. Where is it? Ah, here it is. Okay, so sorry about this. I think the order of our slides got messed up. So we're going to go over conditionals now. It's basically a tool we use to make decisions in our code. So we'll make branching paths in our code. So we're going to do it based on some true false condition. So here's an example. It's like if you want boba right now, you would go buy boba, and if you didn't want boba, you would buy boba later. That's kind of the idea we want to kind of execute when we use conditionals in our code. So what this looks like in JavaScript is you start with an if. So this is called an if statement. You start with an if, and then inside these parentheses is some kind of condition. Again, this is a true false value. So any of the things that Jamie was showing earlier in the presentation that evaluate to true or false would work here. Like 5 is greater than 3, or 1 equals 1, and stuff like that. And then the code inside of this block would be anything that you run only if this condition evaluates to true. Okay, the next thing is the if-else pattern. So this looks pretty similar, except we've added on a little extra section here. So again, the if statement works the same way, where it only does this code if the condition is true. But now we have the else block, and the else block is the code that runs if the condition was false. So this is more in line with that example I showed in the diagram, where this is our condition. So do I want boba? And then if it's true, we would do this. And then if it's false, otherwise, we would do this. The last kind of main conditional pattern we can have is the if, else pattern. So this is if you want to test multiple conditions. So we would do our if statement here with a condition here. We would have then an else if, and then another condition here. And then we could do as many of these as we want. And then we just end with the else. So if this condition was true, we would do this code. If this condition was true, we would do this code. And if none of these were true, then we would execute on this code. So any questions about that? I'm about to go into an example. Okay. I don't see any. Oh, I can't see chat, but I'll take silence as a no. So we'll go in the console and let me get rid of all this. And let's do an example with the if statement stuff. So we can do a variable here. Let's just do that example we showed in the slides. Do I want boba? Okay, I messed up the syntax. Equals to, so we'll do true for now. And then we could theoretically make this do I want boba value depend on some other thing, like if I'm hungry or something like that. But for now, we just do it with true. And so let's just define a function here. I'm going to just do a simple function. Do I want boba? So if, or do this. I'm going to do this let because I think I'm going to redefine the function. So if do I want boba is true, then I would do something like console.log go by boba right now. And this is a pretty trivial function, but I just want to show off how the if statement works. So we can call this function with the do I want boba variable, and then it would print out go by boba right now because we define do I want boba to be true. So if I did like not here, so I get the opposite of do I want boba, it would print out nothing because we didn't define anything for our function to do if this was not true. So I can go ahead and redefine this function and add the else part of our conditional. Oops, sorry about that. Add the else part of our conditional and do console.log by boba later. Okay, so now we can run by boba with do I want boba, with not do I want boba. And this would be false because do I want boba is true right now. And then now it says by boba later because we define that else block. The last thing is the if else ladder, so I'll just show that really quickly. Let's do another function here.
Just a quick rundown of how large group is going to go. We're going to start with some announcements, have musical worship, followed by a message from Pastor David, and then have a time.
Okay, so we'll define another function here, which is going to be, or let's redefine the boba function, sorry. That's what I meant to say. This time, we're also going to say, do I want boba? And we're also going to take in a money parameter or argument. So we can do if money is greater than $4. And do I want boba? Then we can do console.log, go by boba. And then we can do an else if money is greater than 4. Or, oops, sorry, if money is less than 4, and do I want boba, then we can do a console.log Sadly, you cannot buy boba because you still want boba, but you can't buy it. And then the else is going to handle every other case, and then console.log. Try your best to get boba. Okay, so now we have our new buy boba function, and we can pass in do I want boba, and we can also pass in the amount of money we have. And if I have 5, then it says go buy boba right now, because do I want boba is true from that variable we made earlier, and then 5 is greater than 4. And you can see this if it's 0 or something like that. Sadly, you cannot buy boba. Okay, those are just like the basic conditionals. Any questions about that after that example? If not, I will go ahead and we can do another poll to see your understanding. Oh, true. Okay, I can see chat when there's a poll. Minar says it doesn't really matter, but shouldn't it be greater than or equal to 4? This is true because we're assuming that boba is exactly $4. My bad. Another question: difference between triples equals and double equals. I think this was talked about earlier. The triple equals is what we call strict, and double equals is what we call loose. And if you do a triple equals with something like the string 1 versus the number 1, you would get false, but the double equals would do true. Yeah, exactly what Jamie. What if you declare a variable without let? So Jamie went over earlier that if you do a variable with let, it lets you change the value of that variable later on. If you do with const, you cannot change the value of that variable afterwards. All good, all good. Oh, x equals 5. Oh, I see, I see. So that typically works in the console, like just doing x equals 5, but we do not recommend you do that, especially when you are writing JavaScript in like an actual file. Okay, I'm going to close the poll in a little bit, so try to finalize your answers. And then we'll go over the questions. Difference between let and const again. Oh, okay, yeah. So let, if you declare a variable with let, like let my var equals something, you will be able to reassign to that variable. So later on, I could do like my var equals 2, or my var equals the string hello. But if you declare your variable with const, like const my var equals 2, then when I try to change it later on, it will not let me change it, because a const variable is supposed to be constant. Okay, I'm going to close the polling now, and we'll go over the results. Okay, so the first one here, pretty short piece of code here. We just have, well, I know you can't see it, but we just define a variable called greeting, assign the string hi to it, and then we check whether or not greeting is equal to the string hi with the strict equals. And so we would get hello because that's true. The next example here, we have a test score variable assigned to the value 50, and then we test if it's greater than 60. And because it's not, we will run the else block instead, which is you failed. SAT. Okay, the third question here is a little bit tricky. So you have a test score set to 95, and you test first if the test score is greater than or equal to 90, and if it is, you print out you got an A. And you do the same thing with 80 and 70 to print out you got a B or you got a C. So this one's a bit tricky because you might think that after you test the first case that we move on, but because this is not an if-else-if ladder, you actually test each one. So you first test if the test score is greater than 90, which happens, and then you test if the test score is greater than 80, which is also true, and then you test if the test score is greater than 70, which is also true. So you would end up printing all three of the messages. So this is different from the next question, which does use the else if. And this just kind of showcases how else if is supposed to be mutually exclusive results. So only one of those blocks will ever run, as opposed to when you have multiple ifs, just one after the other, they will run all of those conditions. So this last question, we have the score of 80, and we test if it's greater than 90, 80, or 70. But we're using else if instead, so we would only get the true on the scores greater than or equal to 80, and then it would print out you got a B. Okay, so we're gonna stop that now. Any questions before I move on to the next section of the presentation, which is gonna be arrays? I'll take silence as no. Okay, awesome. All right, so now that we talked about objects, which is a way to store data in like key value pairs and group data together, we're going to introduce another way to store a bunch of values together called an array. And the difference between the array and the object is that the array stores them just sequentially instead of using those key value pairs. So you can think of an array very simply as just a collection of values. For each of those values, we like to call them elements. And arrays are useful to store a large amount of data. Usually, each data point is like related, but obviously you don't have to. And then also, arrays are very useful for performing operations on a lot of different values more efficiently, or well, efficiently, as in you don't have to write it out manually. So this is what arrays kind of look like. Here we see we can make an empty array, just an array with no values in it. We can make an array with numbers in it. We can make an array with strings in it. And we can even make arrays with different things. So number here, a string here, a Boolean here, and then another number here. So these are all valid ways to create an array. And this is, again, just assigning that array to a variable. So array elements, let's talk about them. Array elements are indexed starting at 0. And this is relevant for when we want to access the elements. So like I said earlier, arrays aren't key value paired. Array values aren't stored via key value pairs. So instead we use this thing called an index. And so the index of an array element starts at 0. So 0 actually refers to the first element in our array. 1 refers to the second element in our array, and then so on and so on. So we see this in the code. When we actually want to access an array, we'll use the index number to do that. So if I have this array here, well, this should be a let before this, my bad. We've got an array here, and we want to access the first element, we're going to use index 0. So we assign numbers square bracket index to the first element variable, and we would get 1 from this. If I used index equals 1, I would get 2 instead. So hopefully that makes sense how the index works. And here's just some basic array operations you can perform. I don't expect anybody to memorize these things. You can always find like the documentation online of everything you can do with an array, but here are just some examples of common operations we might use. So you might ask yourself, if arrays are just collections of objects and they don't have that key value pair property to them, then why would we not just use objects? So the reason we would use an array over an object is because if we have some kind of collection of data where we don't really need those labels, those keys for each data point. An example would be if I had a bunch of test scores I wanted to store. If I tried to do it with an object, I would have to label each test score with like some arbitrary name that I don't actually really care about. So I could do like test score 1, test score 2, and if I had like 100 of these, I would have like test score all the way to test score 100. So before I get to the next one, so if I had an array instead, I could just do const test scores equals that list of items, and then you would access each one just using the index. So it's automatically a very easy way to reference each object, each item inside of the array without using some kind of label. Any questions about arrays before I keep going to traversing arrays? I can't see chat, so I will take silence as no.
There's a couple questions.
yeah.
So one is, do arrays not have fixed length in JavaScript?
Yeah, so if you are coming from, I don't know, something like a C background or something like that, you'll be used to arrays that have some kind of fixed value that you need to declare. In JavaScript, they are dynamic, so you can add to them and remove to them, and they will change their length as you go.
Someone asked, is it possible to have an object with one of its properties being an array?
Yeah, so just like we can assign variables, we can assign arrays to variables. You can also put an array in one of an object's properties. That's definitely something you can do. You would do the same thing as assigning a property, a number, a string, or whatever. You would just put this square bracket and then all the elements you wanted inside of it. Any other questions? Okay. So now we'll get into what if we want to do something with every element array. So say we had 100 items and elements in our array, and we want to go through all of them and do something with them. So to do that, we have to introduce a tool called loops. And we use loops, basically, we say to iterate or traverse through an array's elements. This is just like kind of fancy words for saying basically we just go through the array element by element and try to do something with each element. So here's what a for of loop looks like. This is the type of loop we use to go through an array's elements. So we start with a for, and then we have this this statement here, constant element of my array, where the constant element is just you can think of it like a variable declaration. This variable element will hold, when we're running this loop, it's gonna hold the current element in the array that we're looking at. This is just the name of your array, so I'm just using my array for now. And then this is the actual code inside the loop we call the loop body. And so the reason we call this pattern a loop is because for every element in our array, we're going to run the code in here each time. So there's a very literal way to read this for of loop. you can say for every element of my array, run the following code. So right now, all it's doing is console.log element, but you can do like other stuff with it as well. So let's do an example here so you can get a better sense of how we use arrays and then also traversing arrays. Okay, let me get rid of all that. So let's just create an array first. I want to do let because I want to be able to change it. Let's do boba flavors. So you can have stuff like matcha, the classic oolong. What else can you have? Matcha. Boba flavors, mango. I know Ronde has taro as well. Okay, we'll just do that for now. So just to show off some of those array operations, we can get the length of our boba flavors array, and you can see there's 4 elements, so it gives 4. We can also add a flavor to our array. So using the push method, push operation. So I know Ronde also has this cucumber lime boba flavor, which is, in my opinion, really bad. So it's a perfect opportunity to show off pop, which gets rid of the last element in our array. And then if I show boba flavors, you can see there's only 4 elements now. Okay, now the other thing I want to show you is the array access. So boba flavors, I can do index 0 is to matcha, index 1 is to oolong, index 2 is to mango, index 3 is to taro. So we can see exactly how the index is starting at 0 and refers. You can also try, I know some people might get curious about this, you can try a number outside or like greater than the number of elements, and you'll just get undefined. And I think that's specific to JavaScript. Some languages will like throw an exception or error out or crash your program, but JavaScript will just give you undefined. Okay, now let's do an example with going through all of the elements in your array. So let's define another array called boba prices. And this is just going to be how much I spent on boba orders, maybe like throughout the month or something. So let's get some cool prices, maybe a big spender sometimes. Okay, so now that we have this array, I want to define a function. I'm going to say sum, and I'm going to pass in our boba prices. Or I could just say like prices if I wanted to. And so in this function, what I want to do is sum up all of the elements in my array. So I can get like the total amount of boba expenses I used. So we can know our for of loop here. So we'll do for const price of prices. And then before that, we would put some variable to hold the total. So let total equal 0 to begin with. And then for every price we go through, I want to add to our total. So I'm going to add to the total the price. And that's our for of loop. Now all we need to do is return the total from the function. Okay, so now I can use a sum function on our boba prices array we defined earlier. And if we do that, we get 24.5, as you can see. So this for of loop here went through each price. The first time we went through this loop, price was equal to 4.50. So we added 4.50 to the total. The next time we went through this loop, the price was 4.25. So we added 4.25, and then we kept doing that. So this is how that for of loop works. Each time you go through the loop, this variable, whatever you named it, will take on the value of one of these array elements. Any questions about that example or arrays or anything like that? I will take silence as no because I cannot see chat, unfortunately. Okay. So let's do another poll just to check in whether you understood the content we just went over. And I guess while we're doing that, I can play some more lo-fi beats. Let me know if you guys can hear this or not.
Cannot hear.
You cannot
it.
hear.
I don't think audio is being shared.
Oh, I see. How do you do this? Boomer dude. Oh, I got it.
This is quite loud, Miles.
It's very loud. Let me turn it down. How do I turn it down? Zoom. Wait, is it still loud? Because I turned it down on my machine.
Yeah, it is. It's probably outputting to
Let me just
panel.
stop for now and see how I can fix that. I'm sorry, I ruined the lo-fi vibes.
Is now hi-fi.
Okay, so I'll be closing the poll in a little bit. So go ahead and finalize your answers. Okay. So let's just go through these questions. I know you can't see like the poll window, sadly, but let's go through the answers. First question, we have an array called monthly expenses, which has just a bunch of string numbers. So yeah, has a bunch of numbers in them. We have console log monthly expenses, and then index of 1. So remember, the index of 1 refers to the second element in the array. So when we console log the index 1 of that array, we will get 215.70. And then what we do is we push another number called, or we have to push another number 240 to the array, and then we console.log the length of the array, which is now 4 because we added a new element. So the second the second question we have is another array of, let's say, ratings out of 5, and we console logged the ratings and then ratings.length.-3 as the index. So ratings.length is 5. So if we subtract 3, we get 2. So that's the third element in the array, which is 3. And then the last question here is just an array of strings, which are different greetings you can do. We popped the last greeting in our array, and then we're traversing our array, going through each greeting and logging it to the console. So we get hi, yo, and what is up. If that didn't make sense to you, totally fine again, right? Arrays are something I think that gets introduced a couple weeks into CS31, or at least 1 or 2 weeks. So if you don't understand, it's totally fine. Again, we're just putting all this information out. It's a lot of information to process. Okay, so that does it for all the content we have to cover in this workshop. I see we are exactly at 8:01, so thank you everybody for still being here. Please remember to fill out our feedback form if you want to enter the Amazon gift card raffle. And then a small announcement here, our next session is going to be on the DOM API, which is what we use JavaScript, how we use JavaScript to interact with, let users interact with your web page, and basically all the logic that goes onto your site. And that's going to explain how Jamie did all of her stuff in her preview at the beginning of this workshop. Yeah, so what we're going to do right now, I'm going to go ahead. Yeah, so I think what we're going to do right now is Jamie's going to open some breakout rooms, which you can self-assign to if you want. And we're just going to have some officers in there so they can answer questions you might have or review any concepts that were confusing. If you do not want to stick around for that, you're free to leave. We are a little bit over time. But thank you everybody for coming out. Really appreciate it. And I will go ahead.
Do you want to stop the recording?
Yeah.